Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Friday. Friday, July 22nd, 2022. So go play the 22 lottery. Excellent. Numerology for the morning. We're back live with a live show for Friday. I sent out a 1-hour special pre-recorded short thing just to keep you company yesterday as you were waiting for the big hearing, which was a prime time hearing, the finale, season finale of season 1 of the January 6th committee hearings. And I did get to watch these because they were on in prime time, and I got to build my day more or less around it. I mean, that wasn't what I was doing all day, but it gave me the chance to sit down and actually watch it in real time and see the whole thing and not just rely on clips from Twitter. So it was really interesting. And so we'll be talking about that today, and why not? Let's catch up on those things. It was a bad day for a couple of other Republicans besides the former guy, Trump himself. I thought that was really interesting. And as a matter of fact, our special guest today, I was just thinking you could do a dumb radio bit like our special guest today. We'll be interviewing Senator Josh Hawley. Senator, come on in here, and then just like do the running away sound or something like that. Senator, please, just, he looked about as bad as anybody could. It seems like he was targeted by the committee for some special attention, of course. Everyone knows the now infamous picture of him saluting the crowd outside of the Capitol with his raised fist on his way. So I don't know where the hell he was going at that point when he actually did that. But when it was very clear that that things were going to grow out of hand at some point real soon. The crowd's growing, and he goes out and gives the fist up, salute there. And some number of hours later, at some point, after having encouraged these idiots and egged them on with the raised fist thing, they were showing inside security camera video of Josh Hawley. I assume it was Josh Hawley. I mean, I don't think it really got close enough to tell me that it was Josh Hawley, but security camera video of him literally running through the halls of Congress, running away from the insurgents as they burst through the doors. So that was kind of amazing, from stalwart, tough guy supporter, raised fist thing to, oh my God, I got to run away. And as many people recognized, quite the metaphor for the Republican Party as a whole. The idea of, egging on these kinds of radical activist, protester, insurrectionists in general, and trying to get them to vote, in feeding them terrible manufactured lies for so many years, and not just the big lie about the election, but all the things that they're still doing, by the way, and still working on currently, not just Trump himself, although he's still working on this thing currently, too. That's another angle on all of this that I don't think we've discussed yet. But, Chris Rufo kicking off another campaign to just change the definition of everything and then tell everybody that, real bedrock, salt of the earth American parents need to be scared to death about, I don't know, just about anything. Anything having to do with anything other than heteronormative 1950s pretend lifestyles. I say pretend, of course, because while we think of them as we have that ideal thing that we're supposed that those who are nostalgic for the 50s are always casting back to. It was always a fake at that point anyway, too. And all of the people who everybody claims came out of nowhere always existed all the time. They just only really realized between then and now that they should speak out about their existence, and maybe that would prevent some people from condoning their persecution. Anyway, It is Friday. I said it was a Friday that feels like a Saturday because yesterday being Thursday felt like a Friday because we were off the air. But now this Friday feels like a Thursday because guess what? As a surprise to everyone except for the loud noise announcing his presence, Greg Dworkin is here. Because we missed yesterday and because there was a January 6th hearing in prime time yesterday and everybody's talking about it and Greg wants to too. And so do I. And I want, more than anything, I want Greg to talk about it. We're going to do that. So good morning, Greg. Thanks for coming by in this special edition of Kagro in the Morning. Please don't run away like Josh Hawley.
Special guest, could you please,
Yes.
while I present things, go get the Benny Hill theme song? Because, one of the funniest things we saw on Twitter was somebody who had the Hawley tape of him hauling ass, and they put it to Chariots of Fire, they put it to Nina Simone, and they put it to Benny Hill, and it's hysterical.
Yakety sax. It's great.
And for you younger kids, there's a whole bunch of other people I never heard of that they put him to, and you'll probably think that's a lot more relevant. But, Benny Hill for me. Thank you very much.
Yep. It was wholly unnecessary just in terms of...
It was great.
Josh
and
Hawley,
I think what happened is Ted Cruz dropped off his cell phone with the committee and said, would you mind getting rid of this guy for me?
Oh, yeah, maybe. I mean, it could be. Well, anyway, it was a great moment, and there have been several. And nobody looked real great yesterday. That's for sure.
No, it was great that nobody looked great. And in the pundit roundup, I actually had a link that somebody posted. Somebody took video of the actual committee hearing room.
Oh, okay.
When they were watching the Hawley video, bursting into laughter.
I'd like to see that. All right, it's in the
I have it.
pundit
I'll send
roundup.
it to you.
Okay, well, I can find
Meanwhile,
it.
J.C. Whittington from Politico talked to former D.C. police officer Michael Fanone outside the hearings.
Yeah.
Here's his response to seeing video of Hawley running away from rioters. Fanone said, and I quote, and so you don't have to bleep it because it's a quote,
okay,
Josh Hawley's a bitch.
Oh, hey, I don't think you even have to bleep that anyway, but that's pretty good.
What's bleepable
it's really
and
going to
not
hurt.
bleepable is in the eyes of the bleeper. You know what I'm saying here?
All right, well, I'm just going to bleep that then. There you go. I can bleep anything I want. Also, when they presented the video, they made a formal presentation of that thing, and they made
plus slow mo.
They
did it in slow motion, so you could do Chariots of Fire.
That was really that was an extra special bonus. But there was testimony, I guess, of one of the Capitol Police officers was read back where she was saying, and she made a great point. And just as an extra dart in Hawley's back here, was that one of the things she said, one of the things that really irritated me about the raised fist salute to them was that he was giving that salute to the crowd from a safe space, which I was protecting. I was holding that crowd back. That made Hawley safe to do anything he wanted to. And what he decided to do with it was egg them on to attack me and push their way through to the Capitol. And I'm glad that I love the dropping of the safe space terminology too. That doesn't help him any. So well
I just
planned.
Sent you a video of a couple of seconds of the committee hearing actually reacting to the Hawley video with laughter. I don't know if you can play it or whether you want to play it or whether you just want to look at it during the break. It doesn't matter. It's just very funny. Yeah,
it's not that long here, 11 seconds. I got to engineer it up and open it on the right computer to get the sound through, but looks pretty
in the
good.
Meantime,
Good idea. I'll say that.
So let's look at this hearing from a couple of different directions. One of the people you and I really respect for different reasons, you know her, I don't, is Sarah Binder. And she was looking at the hearing and noted last night, the hearings focused on Trump's dereliction of duty, even more so than earlier hearings. Convinces me the panel's core goal is political, not legal. They want to crack GOP elite support for Trump, making it politically untenable for more GOP to back him again. That's a high hurdle for sure, but in her view, watching it, that's really the goal. And so, when you step back and look at it, and a lot of the legal analysts who actually are expert at this, I am not, I don't pretend to, but it seems to me pretty clear, and this is stuff we've discussed on the show, you have plenty of reason to think that Trump was obstructing the government's job, doing their work. You can charge him for that. There's witness tampering. You can charge him for that. And the thing is, if you really want to get to the heart of seditious conspiracy, we're not there yet because you haven't shown that Trump knew there was violence and was encouraging it. But we're getting closer because last night we learned that in that 187 minutes of Rosemary Wood missing information, where Trump didn't do anything, he really was doing a lot. He was on the phone to the senators trying to get them to continue to go ahead with his plan of delaying certification for Biden. So he was active. He was in the White House
logging anything.
Dining room and not the Oval Office, because he could barricade the dining room and not have anybody in. He wouldn't let the reporters in. He wouldn't let the photographer in. He wouldn't let staff in, except immediate staff. Whereas I'm told, all the reporters say, you can't sit in the Oval Office and do this because the Oval Office has too much access. But the dining room off the Oval Office essentially, I guess, has one way in and one way out, or at most two. And so you can't control the Oval Office access the way you can. And Trump basically didn't want anybody seeing what he was doing or not doing. And Patsy Baloney testified to the fact that there was TV on, you could see it. There was violence, you could see it. Pat Cipollone testified that everybody in the White House wanted the Capitol rioters out of the building. And when Liz Cheney pressed him about, well, what about Trump?
Yes.
Did Trump want it? Cipollone tried to weasel out of it. And we'll talk about how many of us just can't stand Pat Cipollone, the hero. But anyway, the idea was Cipollone tried to weasel out of it and said, "Oh, you were only asking me about staffers." And Cheney said, "No, I asked you about the White House."
She did initially say staff, and then she changed her question because she knew what was going on. She knew what he would say.
And so Cipollone looks at his lawyer. The lawyer looks at him. He looks at the lawyer. The lawyer looks at him. And Cipollone says, "Yeah, well, yeah."
Right. See, now that one, you should put the the Curb Your Enthusiasm music in while they're looking at each other. Dun, da, 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 da. All right.
So it's pretty clear that a lot was going on, and that you could show dereliction of duty, which, by the way, is an important concept. It's a military concept that doesn't apply to the civilians.
Court. Yeah.
Okay, but when you think about it, everybody was asking, how is Mike Pence legally allowed to pick up the phone and tell the military to do anything?
Yes.
Get your ass in here and save our lives.
I was wondering about that.
And the answer is dereliction of duty. As commander-in-chief, Trump didn't do anything.
Yeah, so
he deserted his post. And so Pence stepped up as the next in command
I like that.
And did what needs to be done. So he's covered.
Well, good. I didn't think it would. I don't think anybody was going to press him on it, but it's a great
If you were wondering if we're still a country of laws because, well, Pence did all of this, we're no better than a bit. No, actually, he was following, CNC rules.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he did anything that anybody would have any argument with, really. I did wonder when I heard about that, oh, well, maybe he has some authority as vice president, but I guess that's interesting.
For those of you who are sticklers of the rule and believe in rule of law and want to know what procedure is, that's how he was able to do it.
Yeah.
That's my non-lawyerly opinion.
I think that's a good way of putting it then. And I don't know that he is, I mean, no one has asked him and he hasn't said as much and there hasn't been any real reason to do so, but that's a great answer. If it wasn't his answer before, it should be now. I made a calculation that the commander-in-chief was AWOL and that part fell to me.
And so you have Mike Pence in there and let him say it to the public, and that's what you do in September.
Pretty good. I have that bit queued up here if we want to play the in-the-room reaction to the Josh
go ahead.
Hawley. It's only 12 seconds here. Let's see if we can get that going. It's playing, but...
You need to hear
There it is. It's very subtle, but you can, because the sound is
Josh
a little
Hawley
bit low,
takes himself so seriously. Well, here's how other people think of him.
In the room, they're playing it, and they a couple
I want to be in the
seconds
mix.
of
I got to
lead.
be in the room where it happens.
And then run out of the room in a panic.
Run back and forth.
I mean,
back and forth,
the memes for the next couple of days should be gold, but that was very damaging for Hawley.
Yeah, the clip I sent you of the Benny Hill theme song has Hawley running out of the room.
Yeah,
and they flip
down
it
the
and
halls.
Running into the room, and then running out of the room, and then running into the room to the Benny Hill theme. It's
That's
just
good. They
brilliant.
edited the video as well. I saw a compilation of just the same video over and over with different music, and I thought,
including
funny,
Chariots of Fire for the slow part.
Yeah, but this is pretty good.
That one was particularly good.
In and out of the room. All right. Well, he didn't come out great in that one. So okay, Many people didn't. And Ted Cruz was mostly absent from the night's targets. And so, I guess there's some thinking about that.
Right. Also, the people asking for pardons and stuff like that. So let's get formal here. This is how Political Playbook summed it up. The 187-minute hearing, a year and a half later, had 5 moments that you should focus on.
Yes. All right.
1. Testimony of the anonymous White House security official who said members of VP Mike Pence's detail were calling their loved ones to say goodbye because they thought this was about to get very ugly.
Yeah, that was very dramatic and had a lot of people gasping at home.
Oh, I can't believe new information is going to come out. We know all of this. It was all, oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, you guessed that might have happened, but you didn't. It might not even have occurred to you. That's true.
Then you heard the actual panic voices on the radio chatter from Pence's security detail. So, that's the detail that wouldn't let him get in the car.
Yeah.
I'm not getting in that car. Well, duh. Where did that all come from?
Wouldn't let him
Number
get
3,
in. Number 3,
General Mark Milley's testimony expressed with astonishment. You're the commander-in-chief, he said. You got an assault going on at the capital of the U.S. of A., and there's nothing, no call, nothing, zero. Right. And right there is your dereliction of duty to the military, where Pence steps in. And he was very clear. Pence was very clear to Milley. Milley says, I got calls from Pence. I didn't get calls from the president, but I got calls from Pence, and Pence was very clear about what was going on and what he needed.
Yeah, I mean, it made him sound presidential.
Yeah, exactly. The outtakes from Trump video, and McConnell looked very leader-like.
Yeah, briefly.
We're going to do this. And so, it's important because the thing that's left out of this, we'll get to, is Kevin McCarthy, the invisible man. Number 4, the outtakes from Trump videos on January 6th and January 7th, in which the then president struggles to condemn the attack or declare the election was over. He's trying to read from the teleprompter, and he keeps yelling at his people, take that out. I can't say that if you committed a crime. I can't say that.
Yes.
I can't say the election's over. I don't want to say that.
Right. Oh, right. I don't want to. I can't. And then there were some weird words that I can't pronounce this word yesterday.
I can't do yesterday.
That's not going to work. I was glad to see finally videotape proof that he can't see the teleprompter, and that's why he squints.
Yeah.
I mean, we all knew that, but.
Yeah. And then, of course, number 5, the slow motion clip of Senator Hawley fleeing the Capitol not long after he raised his fist in solidarity with its members.
Yipes.
In her closing statement, Vice Chair Liz Cheney said the key question every American must consider is, can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again?
No.
Does that mean that the committee, when they're done, is going to recommend 14th Amendment? What does that mean? It means that there's a provision in the 14th Amendment that says that if you participated in insurrection, you're not qualified to hold office anymore.
Yes. I think that they should. And obviously, I mean, I was going to come to that conclusion anyway, but yeah, that was good of her to raise in closing.
You got to read between the lines, but is that what she's saying?
Yeah, I would think so. I would pair that with what Jamie Raskin was saying the other day. I think not there, but in the Judiciary Committee, arguing with Chip Roy over their interpretations of the Second Amendment, but he kind of snuck in a little reference there that look, basically, there's no way to define what went on here. If people show up at the Capitol armed and insistent on overthrowing the rule of law by force of arms, that's treason. That's what it is. There's only one crime that has its definition in the Constitution, and it's treason, and you've done it. And here you think it's the right of the people because you have this wacko idea of what the Second Amendment means. But it was nice to see somebody from the January 6th committee kind of laying out. Oh, by the way, outside of the official proceedings of the committee, though, but I'll just note for the record that, yeah, showing up armed at the Capitol, that's treason. And between that and the 14th Amendment provision, the case is starting to be built. I mean,
right. So, again,
follow through,
the thing about seditious conspiracy is that you have to show a connection between Trump knowing that there was violence and or being either responsible or a aider and abetter of such, the driver of the getaway car, so to speak. Yes. You have to show he knew. Right. You can't just be an Uber outside. You got to show that I know those guys are in there robbing the bank, but I didn't rob the bank. I didn't shoot anybody. I just drove the getaway car. Well, that's a crime.
Yeah.
So the thing is that what the committee has shown is that Trump was derelict, that Trump set everything up, that Trump tried to block the procedure. But as far as the violence part of it, what that means is that there's a key piece that's missing. And the key piece that's missing involves the Willard Hotel war room and Giuliani and Roger Stone and connections to the Proud Boy and Oath Keepers. And the committee didn't show anything about any of those things, probably because they don't have video and they weren't in the room. And so to me, that's where you turn to the Department of Justice and say, this is what you guys have to go after. We did what we needed to. Sarah Binder's right. But as far as the legal part of it, there's a seditious conspiracy case to be made, but you got to subpoena people and get some evidence. That's your job.
And I'm not so sure they don't have anything on camera because these idiots brought documentary filmmakers in.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know what they have.
Yeah, we don't know what they've got yet.
But I do know that there's going to be more hearings in September, so
That's
I
good.
guess we're going to see some of that. And by the way, getting back to Josh Hawley, Franklin Leonard, reporter, suggested that the Missouri Democrats should hold an annual Josh Hawley Classic 5K as a fundraiser.
Oh, 5K. I see. All right. I mean, I guess that's easier to do as a fundraiser than a 100-yard dash, but still. Yes. Why not? Anything.
Yeah, it's better than the traditional turkey trot that parties use.
Certainly. Absolutely. Plus, of course, a million years worth of he's running jokes, I think.
Right. No, he's running all right. So Amanda Carpenter has the key part. We talked about the fact that Pence was trying to fix things. Schumer was on the phone trying to fix things. It seems like McConnell and Schumer, one of them was on the phone to the defense secretary. The other was on the phone to the chief of Joint Chiefs of Staff. So they were trying to get the military and National Guard up there to help fix things so they could go back to their duties. Okay. And Mike Pence was doing his part.
Yes.
And where was Kevin McCarthy? There was no film of Kevin McCarthy doing anything. And so Amanda Carpenter, except there was quotes of McCarthy saying, this is terrible and this is all Trump's fault. But he wasn't working. He wasn't doing anything. And so this is Amanda Carpenter writing in the Bulwark this morning. Where was Kevin McCarthy? The GOP leader was MIA from critical discussion as the Capitol was under siege and Vice President Pence was giving unambiguous orders. That's the way Mark Milley described it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so the White House said, we're shutting everything down at 4 o'clock because we're all emotionally drained.
Oh, yeah, right.
And the police officers watching this are thinking, what?
Yeah, you're emotionally drained.
Right. But even though the White House was ready to call it quits, the Capitol was still under attack. And then Vice President Mike Pence was on the phone with Chris Miller, acting defense secretary, demanding he get the military down there. Somebody was notably missing from the photos and video of those conversations, and that was Kevin McCarthy. And then they released the actual image and the footage. Where was Kevin? He's not telling. His apparent absence raises even more questions about his actions in relationship with Trump. To date, McCarthy has still refused to cooperate with the committee. It's well known McCarthy had direct conversation with Trump while the attack was underway, and that the GOP leader asked for Trump's help in protecting the Capitol, which wasn't delivered. And he said in live televised interviews on CBS and Fox that he spoke directly with Trump and urged him to calm individuals down, but he was unable to convince Trump. And additionally, Republican Representative Jamie Herrera Butler told the committee, as she told the press back in 2021, that McCarthy relayed the substance of his conversation with Trump to her. As she recalled, Trump told McCarthy, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are.
Yeah.
But McCarthy refuses to talk to the committee under oath. Why?
Yeah.
And the answer, of course, is because he's afraid that if he did that, then the Republicans wouldn't win the 2022 election and he wouldn't be speaker. I mean, it's clear as crystal as to what's going on here.
Yes.
So he's a smarmy little man who doesn't deserve to be Speaker of the House. And that's just so crystal clear from the hearings. And again, Sarah Binder's right. And so if you're trying to convince Republican elite on the Hill to abandon Trump, this is a great way to do it, because what she's doing, what Liz Cheney's doing, is not only showing that Trump doesn't deserve support, she's showing that the people defending him don't deserve support. That's the point of the Josh Hawley tape. That's the point of highlighting McCarthy's missing. Yep. And so if you want to put pressure on them to break, that's how you do it. Well, my chief defender is actually such a smarmy idiot. I can't stand to be in the same room with him.
Yeah.
Well, that's one good way to put a wedge in the Republican Party. So she knows what she's doing. Now, that doesn't prove it'll work, but, she knows what she's doing.
Well, okay. I can accept that. I thought it was interesting just seeing McCarthy brought back to all this. And I love going back to the other thing for which McCarthy is most infamous, his so-called joke that he thought that Trump was being paid by Putin. But again,
Dana Rohrabacher, right?
Reminding everybody that joke came in the context of what had to that point been a serious discussion among the Republican leadership of what was going on in Ukraine and how the Russians were pressuring Ukraine and that they had this maniacal plan to do this everywhere and undermine democracies everywhere. And rather than actually engage with that discussion and look forward and do his part as part of the leadership of the currently of the party in power in Congress for national security looking ahead, he switches the subject and blurts out the only thing he knows about Russia, which is that they're paying Trump, which, I'm glad he admitted it or whatever. But they were, supposed to be addressing an important moment. And he had a meeting with the then Prime Minister of Ukraine earlier that day and didn't take anything away from it at all. He had nothing to add to the conversation. He's MIA on everything: national security, international security. He's pretty much the definition of the empty suit. So, good that we got that on record again. It was nice to see all of that stuff replayed, and even hearing McConnell actually being upset about what was going on, and then remembering, in about a week he did a total 180 and was nowhere to be found, and since then has been zero help as well. So, a lot of
the
exposing
theme song is
there.
Yakety Sax, by the way.
Yes.
Looking it up. Just,
Yeah, but you probably can find it as just Benny Hill. Everyone knows what you're talking about. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue to condemn all of the Republicans involved in the insurrectionist plot to overthrow the government of the United States, only now being investigated and revealed a year and a half after. It does occur to me every once in a while, as much progress as they're making, it bothers me that we are closing out this entire Congress, the 2 years in between the insurrection and the end of this Congress have almost expired. And you probably should keep in mind and tell your neighbors that all of this could pretty much just have the plug pulled on it and it all goes away. I mean, this is all out and on the record and everything, but should the Republicans take control of the House, they plan to spend the next 2 years investigating the investigators. Although that would really be
right. Hunter Biden in
show,
Benghazi,
to say the least. Yes. So,
and again, the thing about Hunter Biden that people have to remember is, he may be guilty of stuff, but for people focusing on Hunter Biden, I just have two words for you, and that's Billy Carter.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. If you remember, Jimmy Carter had a brother who was a little wacko.
Yes.
And tried to exploit the fact that his brother was president, so he used to sell something called Billy Beer.
Yes. Did he do
which
that
was,
during...
as they say in Yiddish, Pischwasser.
All beer was kind of at that point. That was just sort of general.
It was Pischwasser Light, but it was Pischwasser Light with his stamp on it, so he could make some money. Mm-hmm. It wasn't exactly Spaten or Dos Equis or a decent beer.
Yes. Right. Well, yeah, like I say, American domestic beer, and also it was very on brand for that
Very
to be
unread.
what was in the can. I mean, that was what you had to go with, generally speaking. It was before the dawn of widespread popularity of craft beers.
Exactly.
All right.
So anyway,
Yeah.
so
Billy Beer, that was
whatever.
gonna come up.
But here's what they are planning,
What
and this is from
are they
Axios.
Axios.
A radical plan for Trump's second term. Former President Trump's top allies are preparing to radically reshape the federal government, and we're going to introduce a new term of endearment for Beltway, inside the Beltway people, which I think is called Schedule F.
Oh, I see. Oh, and then this is
An executive order known as Schedule F, developed and refined in secret, and then developed and delivered just before Trump left office, essentially said the president now has the power to move civil servants to a category where their jobs aren't protected.
Yeah,
And,
this was on tap.
Jonathan Swan, writing in a two-parter, one today, one tomorrow, not out yet, that essentially what Trump is doing is funding people like Jeff Clark, the disgraced Department of Justice guy, to revamp the rules so that when he gets in office a second time, he can fire everybody and replace them with loyalists.
Right.
So the end of the, here's a bad guy with a good heart who at the end finally did the right thing kind of guy, well, they don't exist anymore because the only people in positions are Jeff Clarks.
Yeah, make sure we put lousy.
Right, so there's no Patsy
idiots.
Baloney's anymore. There's no Patsy Baloney's. There's only Jeff Clarks.
Right, which by itself is not a bad thing. It's just, look at what happened.
No, it's a bad thing. And here's why it's a bad thing. I mean, with Trump, it's a bad thing. You could see why it's a bad thing, and that's why you don't do that.
Yes, I would say by itself, without the other part of the plan to replace them with even worse people, you say, oh, no Patsy Baloney, that's terrific. Oh, wait a minute.
And that, by the way, came out at the hearings yesterday, too. He was asked, Patsy Baloney was asked, how come you didn't resign?
Right.
And he said, who would they replace me with?
Right. Well,
people like Jeff Clark, I'm staying.
Yeah. And he actually, things were so bad that he actually didn't look any worse for saying that. Now, that's been an excuse all along for a lot of Trump loyalists.
Matthew Pottinger said the same thing when he was interviewed. That was the security guy.
Yeah.
Because the chief of national security person was out of the country.
Right.
And Pottinger said, I was asked to stay on until at least he got back.
Yeah.
So I did that.
That made some sense. Even Patsy himself sounded like he was making a little bit of sense saying that. There's very few people for whom that excuse works very well.
Well, but again, it's a reminder that very bad people did very bad things for a very long time. And what Trump was asking from them on January 6th was beyond what even they could do.
Yes, that is a thing. That's at the
and
very
so,
least.
That's why I have very little respect for Patsy Baloney, because I recalled incorrectly that he was the defender of Trump's impeachments. But in fact, he was only the defender of impeachment one. Oh. It turns out that after January 6th and everything he told the committee, he actually refused to defend Trump for the second impeachment, which was after January 6th, which was about January 6th.
Right. Okay. I didn't separate that either, although I don't know if I had a picture in my head. You might have put it there. But okay, now that's corrected and on the record. He did not appear for Trump's defense in the second impeachment, because that would have been rather awkward.
I was talking about this with Robert George, the reporter on Twitter, and Robert George, Rob said, actually, this is his third impeachment.
Yeah.
This whole thing is his third impeachment, has to be seen as such. And so what's the vote going to be? Maybe it's on the 14th Amendment.
Why not? Yeah.
Why not?
I don't see why they shouldn't try it. No one's ever tested that.
But keep in mind what the radical plan is when Trump gets back. He's not done.
Right.
He's still trying to overturn the election. He's still calling people in Wisconsin.
Right.
And he has a plan to put Jeff Clark in charge of the civil service.
Right, if you thought that was over. Now, I do remember that while Trump was still in office, they were working on this, and they were saying that term 2, should he win, was going to be about this purge.
And that's what Schedule F is all about. So when you hear that term, folks, that's what that means.
Now, so the important, I guess the new takeaway here is that now that he's plotting to run in 2024, they're still working on that plan so that he can, yes, he will still impose that should he win in 2024. They haven't just forgotten about that. Although Trump forgets about a lot of his things, but I guess he's paid somebody else to remember it and start working on it. This is his attempt to purge the deep state / replace everybody in government and leave them embedded while he's gone too. After he leaves, even if he were to win a second term in 2024 and then honor the Constitution and leave after the 2028 elections, all of those people would be left in place as civil servants. And probably the last thing he would do would sign an executive order rescinding the executive order giving the president the permission to fire those people very easily so that the next president couldn't fire them. Although then you would just say, well, why don't I just issue an executive order saying I can?
Well, that's exactly right. So what happened is when Biden got into office, he rescinded Schedule F, and the idea is that Trump has it ready to go as soon as he gets back.
Yeah. So this is where you can say, well, it's just a policy disagreement between these two. Of course. Yeah. All right. Well,
somebody also sent around a tweet, it was David K. Johnson.
Oh. Sometimes
friend of the show. He's been on.
Yeah, we'll do his voice. When read it.
Who tweeted, some decades ago, this was the day that the New York Times had the banner headline, Hitler's firing squad start to do their job.
Yeah.
Hindenburg says, great victory.
Well,
as Hitler begins to take over. So, keep in mind that when you let sociopaths into office, David K. Johnson said, this is what you get.
He's right. And that's true. You mentioned also that Trump is still at work calling. You mentioned Wisconsin. There was a piece just the other day that Trump is still calling state legislators and telling them, not let's plan for 2024 or my takeover.
No, but let's try to overthrow 2020.
I still want you to invalidate, decertify your electoral votes, and I'm going to go back and fight again. And I don't know who's taking these calls, but
I don't know. But meanwhile, showing it's not such a good idea, and this is from a day ago but got lost with the committee hearings. Rudy Giuliani ordered to testify in Georgia criminal investigation.
Yes.
A Georgia judge ordered him to testify as part of an investigation into election interference in the state. I'm waiting for him to say Lindsey Graham also has to testify because there's another weasel that
I don't know. Have they not said he has
under
to?
The radar too much?
He has said he is going to. Maybe that was just to avoid being told that he had to.
Graham tried to get the subpoena quashed.
He did, and then I thought I had a story about him turning around on it and saying, well, on second thought, having, lost or realized he was going to lose. I'll have to see if I can look it up. But one by one there,
prosecutors are seeking testimony from Lindsey Graham, a Trump ally who also called Mr. Raffensperger, and Representative Jody Hice, a hard-right Georgia Republican who's embraced false narratives about election fraud in Georgia and who helped lead efforts in Congress to help keep Mr. Trump in power. So I haven't seen that they've accepted or that they're showing up or what the judge is doing with those two guys.
No one showed up yet.
But, make all the mooks testify. That's what I say.
Yeah. Wonder where I have. Well, okay, I may have recalled that incorrectly.
No, maybe you recalled that, but it's just not in the story. So,
all right. Well, then that story is. Okay.
Well, if the Times doesn't say it, is it really?
They will all be eventually compelled. But I had thought that maybe that initially my recollection was that he said, "Well, I'll fight it," and then somebody said, "You're going to lose," and then he said, "Well, I probably won't fight it, but maybe I'll go. I'll do it voluntarily or something." And then they won't be listed as having been subpoenaed and forced. And
right. And by the way, I don't have any comment on this, but I just thought I should mention it. I don't want you to think we're overlooking it. That last night, Lee Zeldin, who's a Republican candidate for New York governor, was assaulted by a guy who tried to stab him.
Is that what happened? Okay.
Yeah,
because I saw the video. I saw the video, and I was like, this guy sort of walks up to him, and then they fall on the ground.
Zeldin grabbed his wrist, and then everybody else tackled him.
Okay. Yeah. I will say that Zeldin is getting attacked a lot lately. Somehow.
Among those who helped to subdue the attacker was Zeldin's running mate, former New York Police Department Deputy Inspector Allison Esposito.
Oh. Well, all right.
Said GOP Chair Nick Langworthy. Still going to lose the election, but, that was a terrible thing to happen.
Yeah, he was just the other day circulating a story about he hadn't been attacked, like verbally attacked, and he was saying it was an anti-Semitic attack, and in the last week or so, it's a little odd. Lee Zeldin has been, the victim of 2-3 different kinds of attacks, and he's generating attention every time that it happens, and I'm starting to wonder what's going on and who this person is who attacked. I mean, this happens. Crazies appear from out of nowhere. Look, I'm glad the guy didn't have an AR-15. At least this time he had a knife, and they were able to stop something.
Right.
I watched the video, and it was unclear from the video. I guess they didn't know at the time that the man had a knife when they first circulated this video. And it's just not obvious what's going on. He just sort of ambles over to him on the stage and looks like he's trying to take his microphone. He's very slow moving. So
I'm just going to add 2 polls to get them in there, because we're going to start looking at polling again, not in terms of predicting who's winning, but just getting an idea, the finger of the pulse, the finger in the wind for America. AP
Fingers,
North Poll,
whatever.
Majority in U.S. want legal abortion nationally.
Okay.
They say Congress should pass a law guaranteeing access to legal abortion. According to a new poll that finds over half say they feel at least somewhat sad or angry about Supreme Court's decision. It is driving things. We know this. Simon Rosenberg had a tweet. He says there's a new poll, Echelon Insight. Republican pollsters showing Democrats 4 to 7 points ahead in generic ballot. And then highly influential in GOP circles, U.S. Chamber of Commerce released a poll showing D's up 46-41. So this is questions about whether McConnell and McCarthy are blowing the election are going to start flying now. There was one we saw, and then there's another, and there's another, and there's another. There's no question that the Democrats have picked up anywhere between 3 to 7 points.
Yes.
And that seniors are not really happy with the Republican plan to get rid of Medicare. And whether or not the January 6th piece comes into it or not is unclear. But there's nothing about a guaranteed Republican win in the fall. This is such a screwy electorate right now. Nobody really knows. Everybody thinks Biden shouldn't run. That's got nothing to do with what happens in 2022. Oh, by the way, gas prices continue to come down, and they will be coming down for several weeks.
Actually, I had to fill up yesterday, so yeah.
And inflation's likely to look better too, according to Wall Street. So all of the talking points that the Republicans have are gone, and now what? What are they going to talk about? January 6th?
Yes,
absolute
they're
policy?
really good on that.
The fact that they're cowards? What are they going to talk about? Social issues? I wouldn't assume anything about how people are going to vote. We don't know.
Yeah.
As people are putting it on Twitter, okay, you're going to take away my bodily autonomy, and you're going to tell me I can't do stuff that we've had the right to do for decades.
For freedom.
But you think that I'm going to vote entirely on what the price of eggs is.
Yes.
I don't think so.
Yeah, well, kitchen table, something. Well, for years, they must have thought, well, obviously Democrats will agree with this. They won't fight against us on this because they always say kitchen table, kitchen table, kitchen table. And, well, okay. Sometimes we're going to get distracted.
So to give you an idea of the finger on the pulse, finger in the wind stuff, the House goes ahead and votes on whether or not same-sex marriage should be codified in law. And people like Marco Rubio say, well, we don't need that. What a waste of time. So
yes,
right. 1/3 of the Republican Party votes with the Democrats to make it happen. And it passes easily in the House. Okay. And the first reaction from the public, well, of course, it'll die in the Senate, yada, yada, filibuster, this, that, and everything else. And Dick Durbin from the Democrats says, I don't know if we have time for this. We have many important things to do. Yeah. And the country as a whole looks at them and says, what are you talking about? This is important. And the House says, this is such a big majority. Let's talk to some of our Senate colleagues here. Turns out there may be 10 votes in the Senate for it.
Well, that would be nice.
So it might pass. Okay. And one of the reasons is because Republicans are afraid of this issue and they want to take it off the table. And if you thought it was just a messaging bill, and as a byproduct of that, you thought messaging bills are a waste of time, look at what's happening with this.
Yeah, sometimes
it pins
the
them.
Gets
sometimes it works. Now they feel like they have to do something about it. And in the end, you get what you want. So more messaging bills, please. Let's do contraception next.
Yeah. And, at this point, we spoke about this
after that, you can do abortion, but do contraception next.
Go ahead and do it. I mean,
then do
there
IVF.
Are some things that are so very cut and dried. I mean, sometimes messaging bills are about very esoteric material, and it really doesn't help. But these are, Well, you know what? These are, I guess, kitchen table, bedrock type issues, even if they're not often actually discussed at a kitchen table unless the kids have left.
Right.
But they touch on a lot of lives. So, all right. Yeah, good. They had some success with it, and sometimes it really works when the House is able to move votes in those numbers. It puts pressure on the Senate.
Right. Another poll, this is Josh Marshall highlighting Supreme Court job approval trend, September 2020 to July 2022. Poll dates, September 8th to 15th, 2020, approved 66, disapproved 33 of the Supreme Court. July 5th to 12th, 2022, approved 38, disapproved 61.
Well, that'll do it.
You have to work to change numbers like that.
Oh, well, then I'm not going to do it. Yet they are doing it. Yes. Well, that's true. I mean, you have to have done something extraordinarily
In March,
radical.
it was 54-45. In July, it's 38-61. You got to do something radical, as you said.
It's not.
And
hard
over just the
work
last 4
necessarily.
months, approval among Democrats has fallen from 52 to 15.
Okay. 50. What do we? Disapproval? Approval? Yeah. Okay. Because approval, that's bad.
So Josh Marshall says one of the most telling tendencies of the recent court is Justice Thomas and Justice Alito's public complaints about declining respect for institutions, and specifically the Supreme Court. But as Obama might have said, you built this.
Yes.
Right? The thinking of the corrupt justices is, we stole it fair and square, and now you're not giving us the deference owed to respected institution. Well, yeah.
Well, there you go.
They want to abuse the power, go totally renegade, and if anybody has a problem with that, it's FOFA.
Okay. Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
FA,
like the kids say.
FO, really.
Oh, or you know what? Just FO at this point.
Yeah.
F off, really.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
F around and find out.
Right. Yeah. So now, you know what? Yeah. If we just don't say it, then we get the initials wrong. I forgot. The kids know their initials very well.
FIFO, fee, FIFO, fum.
Right.
Look,
First
this is
first
crazy
out,
stuff.
F around.
And so, it's such an unsettled electorate, and there's a lot more months to go, and a lot more hearings to come.
Yes,
and
good.
So I just wouldn't assume anything
starting
about
in September
anything.
now. The chairman made an appearance at the end to officially, there were lots of rumors swirling ahead of time that September they were going to restart the hearings, and he came and committed them to it at the end. So that was nice.
Very interesting newsletter by my Twitter friend Tom Nichols, Never Trumper, in the Atlantic, about what it means to be a conservative.
I saw him circulate a screen grab that was quite poignant.
Yes, from Red October. So I don't speak for all conservatives, he says, or any of them, if you listen to my critics, and I'm not going to launch into a long discourse here on Burkean conservatism or John Mill or John Locke or any of that stuff.
No Johns.
Okay. The fact remains, however, that many of us are now in a coalition with an array of groups to our left. Among our former comrades on the right, this makes us apostates, defectors, and heretics.
Yes.
Which is very funny because coincidentally, you have to recall that there is a Twitter account called House Republicans, and it used to be run by Liz Cheney's office.
Yeah.
And it's now run by Elise Stefanak's office.
Right.
And during the hearings yesterday, they were tweeting all sorts of garbage, which had to be deleted like 15 minutes after they posted it because it was being tweeted by a bunch of 13-year-old staffers.
Right. Yeah.
And to give credit where credit's due to 13-year-old, it was posted by 13-year-old male staffers.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So not all 13-year-olds, Greg.
Right. Because the 13-year-old girls have a lot more sense than this. So every time somebody like Patsy Baloney would say, this happened and this was bad and this happened and this was bad and I saw him not doing anything and this was terrible and he wouldn't do this and he wouldn't do that, they wanted to keep posting their mantra, which is, this is all hearsay.
Yes.
But that's not what they tweeted. What they tweeted is, this is all heresy.
Now we get you. Right. Maybe it was on purpose.
So Maggie Haberman got a screen cap of that and said, well, if this is supposed to say hearsay, this is a hell of a typo. But it's right. It was heresy because Republicans were breaking with Trump. And again, my particular observation, which I will stick with, it's my story and I'm sticking to it, is that there are cracks in the Republican Party over Trump. They would like him to go away. There's public support for having other people running. That's about as far as they'll go because they're afraid of the crowd. After all, you could see why Hawley's afraid of Trump voters. I mean, physically afraid of Trump voters because they have guns and they want to kill and hang Mike Pence.
Yeah, those are frightening things.
So, they're not going to actually come out and say anything. The question is what they do. And so, again, let's follow back. It's going to take till September, but let's see what happens with the British, Great British Bake Off between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. By the way, if you want to categorize them now that all the others are out of the race and it's a little bit less complicated.
Yeah, all right.
Rishi Sunak thinks inflation is the biggest problem, and Liz Truss thinks lowering taxes is the biggest problem. And it's going to be all about the economy. It's the economy, stupid, and that's their positions.
Okay, well, that's very traditional.
But it's interesting because worrying about inflation means that you might actually do stimulus. So Rishi Sunak is probably the more reasonable from a progressive point of view of the two conservatives who are very conservative.
Okay.
And Liz Truss is like, you're going to make things worse? Yeah. This is your excuse? This is like George W. Bush. No matter what the problem is, the answer is cut taxes.
Yeah.
So that's who's running. So whoever wins, we're not going to like. But chances are there'll be a caretaker government, screw things up, and then get booted out in a short amount of time, just like Theresa May did. Oh, by the way, Theresa May was at Boris Johnson's last speech, and she didn't applaud. Everybody else did.
Oh.
She did not applaud.
I see. Well, it'll be held against her, I am sure.
Well, Boris Johnson holds everything against everyone.
Yeah.
And, he's probably going to run as Donald Trump's running mate next time because Trump's not going to run with Pence.
Okay.
Anyway,
wow.
One last thing I suppose we should mention for the record because it's probably going to be important but rather esoteric, and that there is a bipartisan Senate group which is working on the Electoral Count Act rewrite.
Oh, yes.
And it's going to be a necessary but not sufficient bill.
Yes.
It's going to make it more difficult for lawmakers to challenge a state's electoral votes when Congress meets to count them, and that's all good. But as Harold Meyerson writes in The American Prospect, the good, the bad, and the omitted, it fixes many problems but doesn't really safeguard Americans' right to vote.
That's true, too. It doesn't do... I mean, it's not supposed to address that. But it would be nice to have that addressed.
Right. So, it is necessary but not sufficient. So absolutely have it done. It's like infrastructure. It's important. Get it done. It doesn't end all the things we need to do, but there's no reason to vote against it because it doesn't do everything you want.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I'd take it.
Take the win.
Yeah, definitely do that. There are other problems with it, and some of them are just inherent in the Electoral College system. And
it doesn't get rid of the Electoral College. Right. That's the biggest problem with
it. Ultimately, it does come down to that.
It works on the electoral count, but it doesn't do anything about the Electoral
even
College.
So, right. Even so, even that might not solve the problems that we have with this particular crop of Republicans who are running currently. Get rid of the Electoral College. They'll just fake the vote count.
Well, that's the problem. You can't do anything when you're working with people who don't have good faith.
That's correct.
I'm not talking about
necessarily
the legislature at this point, but the party writ large. Yeah. The Rona McDaniel, McDonald, McBean, McRomneys.
Yes.
They have no allegiance to anything, let alone rule of law. The only question in their mind is just like at state level in places like Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, if you're a Republican, is how can I make this best for me so that I keep power and you don't get it? That's all that matters to them.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult working with them when, in fact, that's their framework. How does this help me stay in power?
Yep.
Well, there are other reasons to do things. No, there aren't. The only thing that matters is me staying in power. And so if you don't understand that, you're going to have a hard time working with them, and you'll be very disappointed when you don't get what you want from them.
Yeah. Well, dangerous people all around, and well worth keeping in mind that there are some problems. I had a little long discussion about this with Greg Sargent on Twitter, and ultimately, you can't form a perfect bill, and you shouldn't turn away from this one because you can't form a perfect bill. And you can't do it because there's no way to legislate around somebody who's willing to say, I will just be corrupt. I'll just disobey the law.
Well, it's even bigger than that, unfortunately, because there's no, whether you're talking about the January 6th committee and their work, or whether you're talking about,
what am I talking about?
Specific bills like the Electoral Count Act or attempts like it to fix issues. In the end, there's nothing you could do about the Republican base and what they want.
Well, yeah. I mean, they can always cast their votes, but there's nothing you can do about somebody, an entire party.
But they're going to continue to elect people who do the things that we think need to be legislated against.
Yes, and if we legislate against them, they're going to.
And the reason is they want what they want, and screw you, and we just want people who are going to run roughshod over you. That's what we want. That is our policy platform.
That's problematic, isn't it? Yeah. Right. So don't wait around for anything ironclad. This does a pretty good job. There are certain problems that are left standing, and all you can do is raise them and say, this is where we think the point of attack is. Let's organize against it. One, if you can trounce them at the polls, that makes it better. And two, if you go and you change a law like this, and then they just say, well, I'll just break a different part of the law then. I mean, that puts everything in focus. The first time, it's a big surprise. The second time, if you say, unfortunately, we're dealing with people who are habitual lawbreakers here. When they break the new law, that just, I think, probably convinces at least some people, all right, yeah, these people just can't be dealt with. There's no, they're breaking the law sooner than it's written. It's not going to work. So... All right. Well, we've reached the top of the hour. Magic.
Oh, we have. How do you like that? Brian Schatz tweets, this is a fifth-tier issue, but I can't get it out of my mind that several of the most powerful pundits of the country trashed this committee before it began the work.
Yeah, that's right. Tried to prevent it from even starting.
And
it's
already failed.
Right? Well, it's the only thing that's failed is not to bring me more enjoyment that
well,
could
it
be
would have
set
worked
to
except for you
yakety
meddling kids.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg. We'll actually see you next week on Monday.
Yeah, see you Monday.
Oops, okay. Here's the mute button. I knew it was around here somewhere. Welcome back, everybody. Let's continue on a theme. There's a million things that we still have to cram in here. There's an action-packed first hour, and yet, there's so much that we have to get to. As a matter of fact, as I was plotting to overthrow the government, of course, plotting the next hour, a news article pops up that changes the directions already. But let me see. First, I want to double back and say, okay, so I went looking for confirmation of the whichever understanding of the Lindsey Graham story might be the more correct, and I see now the source of the confusion. So I Googled, I went to Google and I Googled. And what did I Google? Lindsey Graham subpoena was what I looked for. And you know how it displays up at the top stories, and it gives you like 4 selections from the news feed, and I don't know whether it's at random or what, but it gives you the headline and a photo that goes with it. And here's what came up. UPI, what is that? United Press International. UPI is the first one. And I guess if we're reading top left corner to top right corner, and then the next row underneath it, again from left to right, we will be reading UPI's headline. This is the confusion. Senator Lindsey Graham to accept subpoena in Georgia Trump election case. When was it? It says 2 days ago. All these are 2 days ago, so it isn't even a matter of clear progression in time, a change in position over time. We're going to have to read some of these articles, I guess, to figure out maybe one of these headlines is misreading things, or I guess it could be they both are from 2 days ago, but one's from 2 o'clock and one's from 3 o'clock, and maybe the chronology straightens things out. But again, UPI, Senator Lindsey Graham to accept subpoena in Georgia Trump election case. CNBC follows that with Senator Lindsey Graham agrees to accept subpoena in Trump election case. And then Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Graham agrees to launch subpoena challenge in Georgia. And then next, Go Upstate. I'm not certain what that is, but I guess a news aggregator maybe down in Georgia or maybe South Carolina for that matter, where Lindsey Graham is from. Spokesman, Lindsey Graham will fight subpoena in Trump case. So I don't know what to tell you. And then the listing of stories just gets more confusing from there on. So, I mean, I don't know. Let's open the Atlanta, Georgia Constitution one and see what they have to say. Now I'm curious and I want to follow up. July 19th, that's just a couple of days ago. I'm losing track. Today's the 22nd, Thursday, 21st, Wednesday. So Tuesday. So it's a little more than a couple of days ago. Although now I realize, okay, well, Atlanta Journal-Constitution is a subscription paper, and we'll see if their IT team is on their game or not by protecting their whether or not they're able to protect their content from my being able to read it in pocket format. And the answer is yes, they're in pretty good shape on that. So they have successfully prevented me from reading it. That's too bad. Who's got another, let me go back over. I could subscribe right now, but that would just take too long at this point. So, all right, let's see. If we go back to the search results, and we'll look at what is Go Upstate? Let's solve that mystery too. Go Upstate, does it have any indication of what state it is we're looking at? And are they subscription, or are they going to prevent me from the Herald Journal? Where is that? I don't know. Is that South Carolina? What column here will tell me quickly? With the weather, maybe if I click on their weather, they'll tell me where they're from. Spartanburg, South Carolina. So that's the answer. Leave it to the weather people to straighten that out. So South Carolina source, spokesman Lindsey Graham will fight subpoena in Trump case as it moves to Georgia court. This also from Tuesday. And let's see, published at 3:28, updated at 5:15. What do they have to say? Lindsey Graham, so here you go. Maybe the update is, he is going to do it. Because, again, headline, Lindsey Graham will fight subpoena in Trump case as it moves to Georgia court, writes Bob Montgomery of the Herald Journal. And starting down right at the top of the body of the piece, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham has agreed to accept the subpoena to provide testimony to a grand jury in Georgia that it's investigating former President Donald Trump and his allies' action after his 2020 election defeat. An agreement between Graham and Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney Fannie Willis was reached Tuesday afternoon. Is that the update? Reached Tuesday afternoon. The agreement maintains Graham's right to fight the subpoena. So there's your confusion. I maintain my right to fight it, but right now I'm accepting it. Or my initial thought was maybe he's accepting it so that he can drag it with him to court and challenge it. So I don't know. I guess it's a mixed messaging, and it's still unclear, and I guess that's the root of the confusion, and we'll have to wait and see what happens in his challenge, which will likely be, I assume, heard before the day he's due in court under that subpoena, and they'll work it out. Is there any indication of when they're going to hash that out in court? Let's see. Because of the agreement, the hearing that had been scheduled Wednesday morning in district court in Charleston was canceled, I guess where he was initially going to challenge it. Graham has agreed to accept service of a subpoena for testimony from the Fulton County Special Purpose Grand Jury. That's a long name. In Atlanta, Georgia, without waiving any challenges or applicable privilege and or immunity, the agreement states. Spokesperson said the senator simply agreed to move the case to federal court in Georgia rather than fighting the subpoena in South Carolina. So he has not agreed to testify. He will fight the subpoena. He's just agreed to accept service of it. He agrees to acknowledge that he received it and that there's no defect in that part of the subpoena. He is going to challenge and said the underlying right to have issued it in the first place, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Does it have a date anywhere in here? Here's why Graham's testimony is sought, because he was a co-conspirator. Legal maneuvers by attorneys. Let's see. All right. Since Willis is trying to compel testimony from those who live outside of Georgia, Willis has had to submit the petitions for a judge's approval. The judge overseeing the special grand jury has signed off on those petitions. The case was initially assigned to U.S. District Judge Timothy M. Kane, who was Graham's law partner back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. That case was then reassigned, I think that's proper, to on July 13th to U.S. District Judge Henry Herlong Jr., who ruled that the subpoena can't be executed for the time being and scheduled a hearing for July 20th, and why that was just the other day. On July 14th, the case was reassigned again to U.S. District Judge David C. Norton at the J. Waits Waring Judicial Center in Charleston. On July 18th, the Willis legal team filed a motion to dismiss Graham's legal team's request to quash the subpoena. On Tuesday, the agreement signed by lawyers for both sides was filed with the court, and nowhere does it say what date you can expect him to appear in Georgia to contest the subpoena, but I guess that's next on tap. So we'll see whether maybe some other reporting has that detail. It's not the most important part of it, but at least we've figured out why the confusion exists, and that's part of what we do on this show. There's more things to be confused about. Do you want to know what they are? Okay. Well, I'll tell you. It's not that. That's not to be confused about. Let's go now to what I was discussing the other day with Greg Sargent. And Ira Goldman has raised some objections to this thing, and I don't know where he stands now in his conversation with Greg, but I retweeted Ira's initial objection, I don't think objection to the legislation passing. This is the Electoral Count Act revisions, but rather Ira's objection to accepting that this change will fix everything. But I don't think Greg Sargent at any point really says, oh no, it fixes everything. It's just a little better at fixing more things than we might initially have thought. Let's see. There is which one was first? I think Greg's first entry here. Oh, I guess I better look at the timeline here. July 18th, at 11:34 is attempt one here. Okay. I'm already forgetting what I'm doing. Oh yeah, right. Okay. And two pieces on the same thing, and I'm trying to figure out which one's first. Okay. Now I know which one's first. So at first was that piece from the 18th, a clever plan to foil a 2024 coup attempt quietly advances. This would have been from Monday. Greg writing, it may seem improbable given adamant Republican opposition to legislation protecting voting rights, but a bipartisan group of senators is close to agreement on a separate, crucial way to protect our democracy, reforming the Electoral Count Act of 1887, just to throw that in there so you remember what year it was done. That arcane law governs how Congress counts presidential electors. And by the way, it's arcane in what sense? Just to sort of set the tone here. It's arcane. It's old, true. It's arcane because no one has ever really had to refer back to it since, because there's just not that much in the way of shenanigans that goes on. It's not arcane because it deals with an area of law that is obscure or unimportant. It's actually very important, but it's kind of laid things out pretty clearly for a long time, and very rarely does it come up. It came up maybe most famously after the 2000 election when you had to refer to it to figure out, okay, what's the procedure again for members of Congress to object to the counting of electoral votes from various states? Oh, yes, that's right. It has to be, objections have to be filed in writing from at least one member of the House and one member of the Senate. Oh, yeah, okay, so we all remember all of that. Came up again in 2004, came up again in 2016, and then again in 2020. So lately it's been a big deal. Anyway, more to the point, here's what Greg has to write. That arcane law governs how Congress counts presidential electors. If senators resolve last-minute differences, a stolen 2024 election might become substantially less likely. A serious threat to our democracy is this scenario. A state legislature appoints a slate of presidential electors in defiance of the state's popular vote, and one chamber of Congress, controlled by that same party, that is the same party as the state legislature that changes the election results, counts those electors. Under current law, those electors would stand, potentially tipping a close election. And this brings up an excellent point, which I don't think I even noticed in my own reading, quick scan. of the rest of the Electoral Count Act. I would have thought that the outcome of objecting to the electors and then having, at that point, the House resolves into the House, the Senate returns to the Senate chamber. They vote separately on what to do. I would have thought, as is the case with most other things Congress needs to do, that the two houses would have had to agree to accept these alternate/fake electors in order for them to count. And that a disagreement among the houses would mean, well, at a minimum, that no change. There's no change from the status quo. And the status quo, as defined by the rest of the Electoral Count Act, is that the one signed by the governor and authenticated as original is the one that would end up standing. But as it turns out, in his reading anyway of the Electoral Count Act, is that it would only take one house's agreement to change that. I had no idea. That's not the way I ever read it. But it's not addressed right here in the writing. But again, a serious threat to our democracy is the scenario in which a state legislature appoints its own slate, and that one chamber of Congress, controlled by the party of the challenging candidate, counts those electors. Under current law, those electors would stand, potentially tipping a close election. But now these senators appear to be homing in on solutions to that problem. If they succeed, it would constitute a substantial accomplishment, thanks in part to the House January 6th committee's focus on President Donald Trump's attempts to overthrow U.S. democracy. This week, senators are expected to reach a deal on Electoral Count Act reform. Trump revealed the ECA's vulnerabilities by pressuring his vice president and congressional Republicans to invalidate electors appointed for Joe Biden in several states as part of a plot to get them to appoint new electors for Trump. The belief that this was actually possible, itself a legacy of the ECA's flaws, helped inspire the violence of January 6, 2021, and so ECA reform's highest profile elements would address those vulnerabilities. This would include clarifying the vice president's role as purely ceremonial, expressly stating that the position has no power to invalidate electors or delay their count. It would also include raising the threshold for Congress to object to a slate of electors. Right now, only one member from both the House and Senate can force a vote on whether to cast out electors. The reform would require 1/5 of each chamber to force that vote. So instead of needing, as you may remember from the scene in Fahrenheit 9/11, instead of needing just one senator to sign on in order to force a vote, you would need 1/5 of the Senate, or 20 members of the Senate in a full 100-member Senate to make that happen. Although, since it happens on January 6th, you might frequently find that there are fewer than 100 senators at the time. But even with 99, say, you would still need 20 in order to get to 1/5. But in a twist, the relentless attention on that aspect of Trump's scheme, pressuring his vice president and congressional Republicans, has overshadowed another essential element of ECA reform: how to address corruption of the state-level process for appointing electors. First, let's note that all states appoint presidential electors in keeping with the popular vote outcome in them, a process that states previously established with legislation. But imagine if a state legislature, with the backing of the governor, claims widespread but fictional election fraud as a pretext to violate that previously established process and to appoint electors for the candidate who lost the popular vote. If one chamber of Congress, say the House of Representatives, controlled by the same party as those state actors and that candidate belonged to, counts those electors, they've become valid. That's even if the Senate objected to those electors. Under the current ECA, both chambers must object to electors to invalidate them. If one objects and the other counts them, they stand. I see what's going on here, let me read that again. Under the current law, both chambers must object to electors to invalidate them. Because I think here they're talking about electors that were originally sent. Like in the scenario we've all been thinking of, which is to say 2020, the Electoral College votes, they vote for Biden, the governor certifies and sends it. Even the Republican governors did agree to do this. Now, of course, you have members or Republicans running for office, running for governor, saying, I won't do that. I would just disobey the law and refuse to certify. But like, for instance, Governor Ducey in Arizona signed the certificate for the Electoral College votes for Joe Biden. But the scenario they were looking at this time around was, well, what if the Arizona state legislature, which is heavily dominated by Republicans, votes to say, wait a minute, we rescind that, and those aren't our electors, and we appoint a new slate. If the new slate arrives in Congress, and under the Electoral Count Act, the two chambers divide and vote, if both, I guess the objection is raised first to the official slate, the one that the governor signed that says, in this scenario, that Joe Biden won. It would require both chambers to vote to reject the electors for them to be invalidated. And it doesn't mean that I don't think that my reading of it is that if that slate arrives and only the House agrees to sustain the objection to the slate sent by the Electoral College and signed by the governor, then they still stand. It's not the case that a new slate of electors sent by the state legislature later can be substituted for the original on the vote of one house. I think that's a misunderstanding of things. So let's see, how does that affect? I mean, there are other scenarios, like if in the future the Electoral College were to cast their votes for Joe Biden and the governor refuses to sign it, but they forward their votes anyway, and then someone objects, saying, well, in that case, if someone were to object because it wasn't signed by the governor and the Electoral Count Act clearly calls for counting, that's the way those things are validated. And I think even the new revision says, the new revision strengthens that language and says it's got to be signed by the governor. That's actually where I think the next problem arises. But if a state legislature were to act prior to the counting, at least, of these ballots, or I guess it probably would work best for them if they acted prior to the dispatch by the Electoral College of their votes, even though it hasn't been signed by the governor. If they then send it their own slate parallel with the Electoral College slate and manage to get the governor to sign their slate, that causes a real problem. But I think a lot of this argument is premised on a slightly faulty reading of or a disagreement about what the scenario actually is. All right, well, let me go on with his writing here, because this sets the whole thing up just fine. Okay, so in short, he says, all it takes is one state's governor in complicity with the House to overturn a state's outcome, and with it a very close national election. That's the nightmare that experts such as Matthew Seligman and Richard Hasen urgently warn against. I mean, you can engineer it. It didn't happen in the 2020 election, but you could engineer something like that for the 2024 election and possibly run into the problem, I think, the problem of the one house being able to make the decision effectively in the future. But that didn't happen in 2020. In 2020, they needed unanimity among the houses in order to swap the electors. Now, however, solutions to this threat are also being debated as part of ECA reform. And here, again, before I go on, I'll say this is where the danger of people like Doug Mastriano lies, that there are Republicans running for governor saying, I will simply sign the wrong certificate. What you and I think is the wrong certificate. What he thinks is the right certificate. I'll declare the opposite result to have obtained, and I will send that. And the current ECA and the revised ECA both place extremely high importance on, and in fact require, the signature of the governor. So what do you do when the governor signs a false one or maybe refuses to sign a real one and doesn't sign anything else. Some of that is addressed, but we'll see how well. Right, so Greg continues, now, however, solutions to this threat, the governor's doing the wrong thing, is also being debated as part of ECA reform. According to two sources familiar with the talks, here are some of the solutions, though they're in flux or could drop out entirely, and some bullet points about what they are thinking of including. Presidential electors must be appointed by the manner that the state's laws dictated before Election Day. This gets at the multiple bites at the apple problem that I have seen in this. This would prevent the state legislature and the governor from appointing sham electors after the voting, right? This just says, yes, the state legislature has the right to appoint electors instead of honoring, or instead of holding a vote that would determine who the popular choice for president is. They can just reserve that right ahead of time, but you can't hold an election and then decide you don't like the results and then take another bite of the apple and say, oh, well, we reserve the right to appoint electors if our guy doesn't win the election. That won't work. And that's not entirely clear from the current text. I mean, it's clear from common sense, and serious jurisprudence would simply disallow the plan where state legislatures get a infinite number of bites at the apple. But remember, that is at least one interpretation circulating among Republican crackpot lawyers about what the independent state legislature theory really means. There's one version that says, they have a lot of power, and then there's one version that says, well, I think they have infinite power. Well, we'll see. But, okay, this addresses that and says, no, they get one bite at the apple. If a state appoints a slate of electors before a deadline, that is the 6th day before the presidential electors meet, which I don't know if it's always the same day. I don't know I forget how the law is written, but this time around was December 14th. So this meaning around December 8th. If at some point before December 8th, a state appoints a slate of electors, then it overrides any electors appointed after that deadline. This would also avert post-vote shenanigans. The governor of each state must certify the electors before that deadline. If a governor violates this duty, the aggrieved candidate can appeal to a 3-judge panel of 2 circuit court judges and 1 district court judge, which is kind of a weird way of putting it together, but I think it makes a certain amount of sense. Ordinarily they don't sit together, but I pondered that a little bit, like, well, what kind of body is this, that it's 1 part district court, 2 part circuit court? But occasionally you find members of the Supreme Court sitting in on circuits, so I guess that's not unprecedented, and they are all federal judges, and it does make sense to have an appeals, 2 appeals court judges, sort of higher authorities and who can deal with the pure issues of law, and 1 district court judge, just because then at least you're guaranteed somebody who, I assume they would grab a sitting district court judge, maybe the senior judge of the district where the Electoral College meets, the one who's eventually to be given possession of one of the copies of the electoral count certificates. But that way, circuit courts cover a number of states. And so this way you're guaranteed at least 1 member of the panel will be from the state in question. And that seems like a must. Plus, it makes it more difficult to, rig the panel, etc. So, okay, I like that aspect of it too. And that's interesting. So if the state or if the governor violates this duty, that is the duty to certify the electors, and now it's becoming unclear, though, to me, what exactly we're talking about. There's this deadline by which the state has to appoint the electors, and the governor certifies 2 things. Certifies, 1, these people are the ones who should be expected to show up at the state capitol on the date that the Electoral College meets, and then there's a certification of these are the votes that they cast on that day. So the governor must certify that the electors before that deadline. That must be the certification of which people will be the electors. But if the governor violates that duty and refuses to accept, say, the Biden electors, either by refusing to sign or signing something other than something that says that these people are the right electors and that the Trump electors are the right electors, that triggers a court hearing. So, okay, that's something too. Like, okay, what do you do if the governor simply refuses to do his job or simply refuses to do the correct job? All right, some remedy. A court will sit and decide which slate to accept. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Something's wrong, I think, with the tweet deck that I'm using is not letting me respond to a couple of things. But I just happened to see our own good friend Jennifer Hayden, Scout Finch, tweeting about Hawley, saying, "I told you he thrives on the attention. He has zero shame," referencing Josh Hawley, I guess currently, now, today, this morning, tweeting around the pictures, a picture of the coffee mug that he has for sale for fundraising purposes of him with, I guess an art or a rendering of him doing the raised fist salute, even though he was proven to be such a weirdo coward at yesterday's hearing. He's responding by doubling down on the whole thing. And because of the fact that he's using this novelty thing, I was thinking, I'd love to see this one countered with a novelty item of our own. I'm thinking of, you remember those old novelty pens? Oh, it looks like the tweet really was perhaps deleted here. But at any rate, you remember those old novelty pens that they did all sorts of things with them. The one I'm thinking of, I think the most popular version, the ones where you would tip the pen over and there's a moving piece up top. There's a scene portrayed, and they very frequently would use it, for instance, to put a woman in a bikini, and then if you're holding the pen right side up, I don't know, however it worked, the bikinis, and then you turn it, and what it was the little piece of film that would move, and the film had the picture of the bikini on it, and it would slide away, and then all of a sudden, naked lady on your pen. I don't know why anybody would put that on a pen, but they did. But there were also less puerile applications of it there. For instance, there were, I recall, one of a scene of San Francisco where there was the moving piece was a cable car, and it would move up and down the mountain, for instance. Very fine and appropriate for children and families, unless you're the family of a stripper and you're very sex positive. I don't know. In some cultures, that's probably okay. So, I don't know. Whatever. The point is, there were many different kinds of novelty pens. I was just thinking it would make a great one to put the scene of the Capitol hallway in there, and the little moving piece is Josh Hawley running through the Capitol, and then you tilt it back and forth, and he's running wildly throughout the Capitol. That's what I mean. That's what we should be doing. And the technology has bypassed that. Now you can probably have a digital pen that actually plays the whole GIF or whatever, but anyway, I liked the retro aspect of it. And that's what I decided I would waste my time on, coming back from this break. Okay, let's see if I can't. Let's see if I can find the new version of that tweet. I don't know why that got untweeted or it was deleted as a tweet, but maybe Jennifer must have fixed something on it, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he got rid of the thing. I got no idea. There we go. But at any rate, back to the real story, which was, something serious, right? We were reading Greg Sargent's description of the changes proposed for the Electoral Count Act before we got to the naked lady pen. Right. Well, anyway, when we left off, we were talking about, the duty of the governor to sign the certificates, and if he refused or signed the wrong certificate, there's this remedy proposed, a 3-judge panel that would determine what the hell to do, and which of the 2 slates purported to be correct was the one that Congress would have to count. The slate of electors deemed legitimate by the federal courts is conclusive. Now, there a problem arises for me. We'll get back to it. Then, next bullet point, Congress must count the slate of electors deemed the legitimate one by this revised process for the states. This means if the federal courts deem one set of electors operative, Congress must count them and must not count the other electors, even ones certified by a state legislature or a governor. Problematic as well. If an election is disrupted by a disastrous event, the state legislature cannot simply appoint electors. It can only extend the voting period. This averts another scenario. A legislature finds a pretext to declare the voters failed to reach a decision and appoints electors itself, which the current Electoral Count Act might allow. So, okay, and that's good to have an escape hatch to deal with natural disaster. It's not at all certain that these ideas will end up in the final product. The spokesperson for Senator Susan Collins, a leader of the bipartisan group, said these contain inaccuracies and warned that talks are fluid. Okay, interesting. But they would be critical, especially with so many candidates running for state-level positions across the country on an implicit or even explicit willingness to use their offices to reverse hated election losses. These particular reforms are essential. J. Michael Ludwig, the retired judge, who testified before the committee to great acclaim, although he did so very slowly, and pondering each word as he uttered it, which I just did. Not necessarily just for effect. It took me a while to figure out how I was going to say that. Anyway, these particular reforms are essential, Judge Ludwig said. That was in a quote directly to Greg. He interviewed him. That's what he told him. They would all but ensure that the country will never endure another January 6th. That's going too far. But all it would take is 10 GOP senators to agree and, actually allow the thing to be passed, of course, and end a filibuster on it. And no Democrats defecting, of course, over the absence of voting rights legislation. And it can be so. So, yes, we would, if this were put forward, I would say, let's jump out of the way and let's not have Democrats objecting, well, there's no voting rights legislation in here. We'll take what we can get and I guess work separately. But I would understand, at least, or I would entertain an argument that, well, remember that there are Republicans who want this cover too. And if they want this cover, they're going to have to pay a price. And the price is that they should have to accept appended voting rights legislation as well. But then it's a balancing act. Do you think that they would, in fact, turn away from this thing and just leave the currently insufficient Electoral Count Act in place and then just exploit the old loopholes if you tried to force them to accept voting rights legislation, which they ought to be accepting anyway, and they ought to be forced to accept it because it's the right thing to do. But will they do it? I don't know. But I could see that playing out, and I would accept either outcome in that if you told me, I'd have to accept your word for it and your reading of the situation as to what could get passed and what could not. Now, let's see. Ira Goldman at that point intercedes with a couple of objections. Though he's not responding directly to Greg Sargent on this, he's responding to Sahil Kapoor's reporting on the same draft being circulated. It was also interesting, by the way, that I note that Greg Sargent's piece says that Susan Collins' office says, well, this contains some inaccuracies. And then guess what? The talking points on the piece came out, on the bill came out, and I don't see anything that was an inaccuracy. All of the things I think that were named there do show up in the fact sheet distributed by her office later on. So that's just a side note. Maybe I'm missing something, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised to have, for whatever reason, although I'd like to get to the bottom of it. Why would Susan Collins' office say, oh, no, not all of these things may survive, and in fact, this summary contains some inaccuracies, and then it doesn't appear that they do. But I'm not positive of that one yet. I'd have to review all the paperwork in order to do that, and that's a side issue. We don't have to get there. We certainly don't need any more ammunition to distrust Susan Collins. That's a given. So what was Ira Goldman, KD by proxy, objecting to that day? He grabs the screenshots of a screenshot of the fact sheet that gets distributed, and then has some notes on it, draws up those notes, takes a screenshot of it with the notes, and tweets first, have to wait for actual bill text, but in the meantime, here are some problems with this Collins-Manchin Electoral Count Act proposal, and they are pictured below. And then I saw him also tweet that and then retweet that with another comment. Congress needs to retain the ability to deal with any corrupt state officials. Indeed, Trump /Bannon /Stone have been working to put big lie believers in key state offices now just to make a state-based coup possible in 2024. Beware of fighting the last war. That is to say, Ira at this point was unconvinced that the mechanisms proposed would adequately deal with state actors like Doug Mastriano, say, sitting in the governor's office, and their declared intent to simply forge a different slate of electors if necessary, or at least refuse to sign the correct one. And he wasn't sure that this was being adequately addressed. His objections here, and again, beware of fighting the last war. That is to say, I think it was his reading that the new Electoral Count Act really only reformed one aspect of the problem. That is that it would make it more difficult to object to electors when they arrived in Congress. Although, quite honestly, I don't think the 20% of the body requirement would have been a problem this time around either. So, I don't know. But certainly not in the House. There were plenty of members of the House who were perfectly willing to object to several slates of electors. Anyway, his objections are outlined here. Now, the Electoral Count Reform Act of 2022 fact sheet is the base document that they're working on here, which reads, the ECRA would reform and modernize the outdated 1887 Electoral Count Act to ensure that electoral votes tallied by Congress accurately reflect each state's public vote for president. It would replace ambiguous provisions of the 19th century law with clear procedures that maintain appropriate state and federal roles in selecting the president and vice president of the United States as set forth in the U.S. Constitution. Key provisions include, and it's not entirely clear if this is the entirety of the key provisions because it's just one page. Maybe it's a 2-page talking points memo. I don't know. But on page 1 that's provided here, key provisions include a single conclusive slate of electors. It includes a number of important reforms aimed at ensuring that Congress can identify a single conclusive slate of electors from each state. It identifies officials to submit the slate. It identifies, these are like bullet points and then the explanation, identifies each state's governor, unless otherwise specified in the laws or constitution of a state, in effect on election day, as responsible for submitting the certificate of ascertainment identifying that state's electors. Congress could not accept a slate submitted by a different official. This reform would address the potential for multiple state officials to send Congress competing slates. How so? It provides for expedited judicial review. That's the bullet point for it. The explanation provides for expedited judicial review, including a 3-judge panel with a direct appeal to the Supreme Court of certain claims related to a state's certificate identifying its electors. This accelerated process is available only for aggrieved presidential candidates and allows for challenges made under existing federal law and the U.S. Constitution to be resolved more quickly. I like that it restricts, or purports to restrict, standing just to the aggrieved presidential candidate. It's not just anybody can file this thing. So that's good. And then it talks about the 3-judge panel, and that's helpful. Next bullet point, it modernizes rules for counting electoral votes by requiring Congress to defer to slates of electors submitted by a state's executive pursuant to the judgment of state or federal courts. So again, the normal procedure still obtains the certificate of ascertainment signed by the governor that says these are the people who are going to be the actual electors on December 14th. Then they go, they vote. They sign the certificate saying this is how we voted. The governor also signs those certificates saying how they voted and sends along with it the certificate of ascertainment saying that these are the people who were supposed to vote. Yes, all good. Suppose the governor refuses to do it, then it triggers this 3-judge panel thing. And, well, maybe we read on. Okay, but the point of it is that, okay, there'll be a 3-judge panel, and they will take a look at the various slates purporting to be the official slates and decide which one they will hand to Congress. And Congress will count that one and only that one. Maybe you see the problem with that. Maybe you don't. Next up, the role of the vice president is clarified. That's good. Affirmatively states that the constitutional role of the vice president is the presiding officer of the joint meeting of Congress, solely ministerial, and that he or she does not have any power to solely determine, accept, reject, or otherwise adjudicate disputes over electors. That seems okay. Higher objection threshold. That's the raising the number from just 1 to 1/5 of the members duly chosen and sworn, and that always raises a flag with me. I mean, I don't know under what circumstances you wouldn't be able to raise 1/5 of the House or Senate duly chosen and sworn, but there are such things. And I say duly chosen and sworn raises a red flag because that's the language that is in the current cloture rule, which occasionally presents problems. The old cloture rule before the 1975 reform was, you needed 67 or 2/3 vote of the Senate in order to invoke cloture, but it was 2/3 of those present and voting. And so it didn't mean, then they changed it to 3/5, but they changed it to 3/5 of those duly chosen and sworn. And so that made for an affirmative 60 vote requirement, as opposed to, well, if lots of people are absent and just don't care to be there to vote, you can hold the vote and 2/3 of whoever's there will be enough to invoke cloture. And really that ought to be the standard, given that, cloture is really all about cutting off extended debate. If you want to continue to debate, that's fine, but you have to be there to do it. You can't just disappear yourself and say, well, now you can't get 60 votes, so that enables the silent filibuster or the painless filibuster. You don't have to actually stand up and talk, and you don't actually have to show up to vote against cloture either. All you have to do is make sure that there aren't 60 votes for cloture, and then your job is done. So I don't like seeing duly chosen and sworn used ever because it reminds me of that. I don't know whether that's really the best solution for this or not. But that's one of, I think, Ira's objections, is he says, why 1/5 of those duly chosen and sworn instead of 1/5 of those present? What if there's a national emergency that limits how many members can attend? Also, you should add an explicit rule that a quorum of each house must be in attendance. It's arguably required by the Constitution, but put it in the Electoral Count Reform Act anyway. Why not double up? Sure, that's an objection. Let's see. Then lastly, there was the protection of each state's popular vote. It strikes a provision of the archaic 1845 law that could be used by state legislatures to override the popular vote in their states by declaring a failed election, a term that is not defined in the law, even the 1845 law that they're using. Instead, this legislation specifies that a state could move its presidential election day which would otherwise remain the Tuesday immediately following the first Monday in November every 4 years, only, though, if necessitated by extraordinary and catastrophic events. So you could move Election Day or extend the voting in the case of a disaster that results in this so-called failed election. The 1845 law says, well, if there's a failed election, then they can appoint their own electors, but it doesn't say what a failed election is, and the assumption was it would be obvious to everyone. But in reality, we now have Republicans who could say, well, all it says is that's what you have to declare, so let's declare it, and they just do. Maybe with a basis, maybe without. We should get rid of that, and this Reform Act purports to get rid of it. Okay, now, Ira's objections, besides the ones that we just discussed. Well, here's where it becomes an issue. As he's pointing to the requirements on the state's governors to sign the correct document, and if they sign an incorrect document or a fake document or one of their own, it triggers court review, right? He objects, though. What if a state's law requires the governor to submit the ascertainment, but the governor refuses, submits nothing, and the state's courts, which can also be partisan, refuse to require the governor to do it, or the governor ignores them? Like, they could issue a writ of mandamus, or they could decide we won't issue a writ of mandamus because we're partisan. Then what do you do? Or the courts does issue a writ of mandamus, and the governor just says, look, you can't actually put a pen in my hand and make me sign it. I refuse. I will defy your writ of mandamus. What happens then? Congress, he says, needs a certificate, some kind of certificate, from a state in order to count its electoral votes. So it's better, in his view, that they receive too many of them, even if some of them are fake, than too few, i.e. 0, because the state's governor refuses to certify. In other words, think of the power that this would grant to a corrupt state official or officials. Okay, all right, where essentially he's pointing here at the part he's highlighted from the talking points memo on it, that the new reform legislation identifies each state's governor as responsible for submitting the certificate of ascertainment identifying that state's electors, and Congress could not accept a slate submitted by a different official. This is aiming at taking away the power of a partisan Secretary of State to act alone, or a Republican state legislature from saying, we're just going to do this thing and we're going to appoint new legislators or new electors. And if the governor were to say, no, to hell with that, I'm not going to sign it because it's a Doug Ducey, for whatever reason, actually doing the right thing at the last minute. This Reform Act says, all right, well, if the state legislature appoints someone new and the governor refuses to sign it, then you don't take that one because the governor is the key official under the Electoral Count Reform Act. But what if the governor is the one that's corrupt and what if he refuses to sign? This talking points memo about the bill, and I'd have to see the bill language. It's out there now, and you can parse it and find out what would it do. But if the talking points memo about it is correct, and it says it's the state's governor who's key to all this, and you can't accept the slate submitted by a different official, what happens if the governor refuses to sign a real certificate actually done correctly, right? Biden wins and he refuses to sign it. And this says the governor's signature on the certificate of ascertainment is key, and it's not here. Now what do we do? And the problem is that it might be read as saying, well, this state has no electoral votes because you can't accept it from any other official, and you can't accept one that doesn't have the governor's signature on it. And it might even mean, what if the governor signs a fake one? Are you compelled to accept the fake one? That's a good question that's unresolved here. Now, you might say, oh, well, that triggers the 3-judge panel thing. But again, here are problems, and maybe you or Armando or someone like you sees this way. So there's the expedited judicial review. That's fine. But it purports here that the court's decision is final and that Congress must count the slate that the court says that they should count. Here's how IRA objects. They can say it would require Congress to defer to something, but the only thing binding on how Congress operates is the Constitution. That is, Article 1, Section 5 grants it the authority to make its own rules. And a rule that says that someone else can set the rules about what you're going to do is a problem. He also adds here, note, when the separate House and Senate sessions were held to resolve disputes in 2021, they were explicitly conducted, quote, pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution 1 and Title 3 U.S. Code Section 17, 3 U.S. Code 17. So, there's limited authority here, and a problem that arises if the court can tell Congress what they have to do procedurally. Is it a violation of the separation of powers and specifically Article 1, Section 5 for the court, this newly created hybrid court, to tell Congress what the outcome of its vote has to be and why? I'm not sure that it's valid on its face to say that Article 3 can tell Article 1 what to do. The power to decide which electors to count and which not to count is kind of plenary to the Article 1 legislature. And to have an Article 3 judiciary impose a solution raises all kinds of problems. There's a separation of powers problem. There's an Article 1, Section 5 problem. There's the political question doctrine problem, that the judges might just say, I know we're sitting specifically for this purpose. Maybe that would help them overcome the judicial or the political question doctrine. Yes, ordinarily this would be a political question doctrine. If you were suing through ordinary procedure in the court, we wouldn't sit to decide this case. We would dismiss it. But because it's a specially constituted court that's constituted by law for this specific purpose, maybe we'll consider it. They might be able to dispense with it that way, but essentially it still comes down to, suppose the court says, this is, as the Electoral Count Reform Act purports to say, this is the slate that's legitimate. And the Congress says, no, it's not. How do you resolve that question? That's a separation of powers issue, and the Constitution says this lies with the Congress. They could defy this court. The court can't issue them an order. And if they do, they don't have to take it. They don't even have to accept it. They don't even have to look at it. They just reject the message when it arrives in the House and Senate. So anyway, that's kind of a big issue. And Greg Sargent returns to it, and he actually had a fairly lengthy discussion about it with me, and then asked some experts and wrote a second piece saying titled here, "The New Proposal to Prevent a Future Coup is Surprisingly Good," and joins with Paul Waldman on this one. And, well, the thing is, he asked some experts, but I'm not certain that he asked them the correct question here. And he comes back with an acknowledgement that, well, sure, no Congress, as he put it, can bind a future Congress to its rules just based on the passage of legislation. But this isn't about future Congress or anything like that. I understand that rule, but I'm talking more about it's a straight-up separation of powers disaster, or certainly could be. Now, you could get around it. A Congress could agree to accept the court's recommendation as its own conclusion and get around the problem, but it would almost certainly require acknowledging that the court's decision is only advisory. I don't think that they would accept a court order telling Congress that it must vote a certain way. Now, again, that's a problem, though, that you're not going to be able to get rid of. I mean, the Constitution does lay this power with the Congress and with no one else. Each house can determine the rules of its proceedings, and of course will determine the outcome and do the counting of the electoral votes. And I don't think that there's any way to move that to the courts legitimately, unless or without an implicit agreement between the two branches to say, okay, well, for these purposes, we will accept your intrusion into our prerogatives because we just want to settle this issue. And I knocked my keyboard over in the middle of all that. Anyway, that's a pretty serious issue, though. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't pass this bill, because it would set this procedure out, and most people will see this thing and say, this is settled. The court will decide. And it says Congress must accept this. But if somebody at the critical time, if you only find out that this thing is insufficient at the critical time, that's not very helpful. But I still would pass this thing. I would make my objections noted, but I would still vote for this thing on the premise that, look, when the Congress lays out that this is going to be the procedure and everybody sees, you involve the judges. And judges, for the most part, are fair, and they rig up this panel so that you couldn't even stack the panel with all conservative justices or judges from one circuit, et cetera, et cetera. Most people would probably accept that as relatively fair, and they won't really understand the objection that it's a separation of powers issue. I'm going to be honest, Greg didn't see it that way, and I'm not positive I'm right about that, because hell, anything could be upside down and backwards, starting now with this new Supreme Court. But it is out there, and it doesn't mean you can fix it. This is just a problem that's inherent. I don't think you can legislate around it because it's based in the Constitution. Think about that for the weekend, why don't you?
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, anyway, maybe you don't want to think about that. Maybe you want something different, lighter, or something from somewhere else in the world besides the United States. Your solution is at hand. Justice Putnam is up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I know he's got some work from around the country and around the world. Let's see. I don't know where this is coming from, but stay tuned. It's all next.